Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic? Let's do it. What's the most bone-chilling thing you've seen when you're in the woods? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I went camping with a group of friends about 5 years ago. We went for a walk along a trail, then decided we would leave the path and try to climb to the top of a large hill. We walked for about an hour, having a blast. The next thing I remember, the guy in the lead just stops dead in his tracks. There were 3 unmarked graves dug in the middle of nowhere. One was about 6 feet, and 2 were smaller. They didn't look recent. We took a couple of photos and hurried back to the campsite. We were all talking about what else would possibly happen when a ranger came to collect camping fees. I told them all about it, and tried to describe where we were. I gave them all of our details, and never heard about it again. I still think about it every now and then. A friend contacted the local police on the way home, but it was almost impossible to clearly tell them where we were. Picture a hungover 19-year-old saying, "Leave the campsite and walk towards one of the hills for about an hour." My family owns a ranch in the middle of the woods, and I would spend summers helping them work it and just generally hanging out. One year they invited me to come spend Christmas with them, so I went back to see the place in the snowfall. I was about 10, so I loved roaming around in the woods by the house any chance I got. So it's snowing, it's dark, everything is still, and it feels like the perfect night to go for a walk in the woods. The moon is bright, so I don't bring a flashlight and head out. I got to the point where I was out of sight of the house when the quiet, snowy silence was broken by this creaking, like something hanging. It's coming in several directions, so I can't figure out where to look for the noise, but I continue walking. Finally, I come around a tree and come face to face with a skull at my height. I scream and start running, only to run straight into another one of these things hanging from the trees. It's white, but there's blood, and I don't stick around long enough to figure out what it was. I book it back to the house, screaming that there are dead bodies in the woods, and my cousins immediately start laughing at me. It turns out a few sheep had died recently. 1 was a dog attack, 2 were because they were old, and since the ground was too cold to bury them, they hung them in trees for the winter so as not to attract coyotes. Still, even in the daytime, seeing those bodies hanging from the trees was freaking creepy. And it didn't help that 2 years after that, I ran into a bone display where someone had laid out the remains of a deer to make the body point at a twisted, dead tree. My parents were avid campers, and we spent most weekends, weather permitting, camping. When it was cold, we either used our touring caravan or our static. When I was 15, my dad passed, and my mom didn't want to carry on, so she sold the caravans, and we just kept the family tent and 2 smaller tents. Me and my younger brother decided we would use the small tents, and we would camp from Friday until Sunday evening, depending on school holidays, family events, etc. We got a few friends to come with us in their tents. So my brother got a girlfriend and he stopped coming. So it was me and 5 or 6 friends. We would normally just drink cider, smoke some poor quality weed, and when in season, take some mushrooms. Where we used to camp was very isolated. The only thing around was a couple of farmers' fields. We knew the farmer, and he didn't mind us camping on his land. While an older friend of ours was heavily into glue sniffing. I don't know if USA readers know what that is, but it's a cheap high. He would be out most nights at the same place. When he wasn't sniffing, I would spend time with him. We both liked the same music, and we were only one of 6 or 7 punks in our village. He told me one day the night before, someone had walked past him. That doesn't sound unusual, but if he sniffed, it was very, very rare that someone would even be near there. We were camping one Friday evening, and the farmer came over with some apples for us, because where we camped was near a stable with a few horses in it, and I love horses. So he said, "Eat the apples and feed the horses." It was kind of a trade-off, really. We stopped people poaching on his fields or riding motorcycles on his paths, and he let us camp. Anyway, he mentioned a neighbor's farm had the police visit. Apparently, one of the farmer's horses had been killed. The story goes that someone hit the horse on its forehead with a large 6-inch nail, then mutilated the horse's genitals. I'm not going into too much detail, but you can use your imagination. Well, the next night, we were just getting ready to go to bed, so it would be 3 a.m.-ish. We did the fire, picked up all our rubbish, etc., and me and my best friend did the little walk around the area just to make sure no one was hiding or going to throw stones and branches at our tents. We all heard a noise, and one of the horses sounded spooked. So we walked over, and believe me when I say we can be quiet. It's not an idle boast. We walked over the fence and saw someone in the stable. We shouted something like, "Oi!" and the guy ran off, heading straight to our camp. Anyway, he got to the fence, and he was just going over it, and I pushed him quite hard, and he fell. Someone from the camp heard what was going on and grabbed the guy, holding him in a weird bear hug. We marched him back to the camp, and we noticed he had a backpack, so I opened it, and inside was a hammer, a few 6-inch nails, and 2 very sharp knives. I told my friend who had a bicycle to go to the phone box and ring the police. Well, normally this is a 20-minute wait on a good day, so I said, take your shoelaces out, tie him up, gag him with a sock, and tie him to a tree, which we did. The police came about 25 minutes later and saw what we had done. They laughed and then took a look in the bag. Serious faces all around. They untied the bloke, handcuffed him, and took him away. The next local paper comes out. Guys, on the front page, police have been looking all over Lancashire for him for months. We get no credit. I didn't want any, but after that, any reports of large bonfires or rowdy teens in my area got ignored most of the time. The farmer told his friend who lost a horse what happened. We told him, and he said thank you. TL, DR. Me and a bunch of 15-year-olds caught a horse serial killer. I'm from rural Wisconsin and grew up near a huge forest. We never camped overnight there, but my brother, sister, and I would spend almost entire days hiking through the woods when we were younger. Deep in the woods, we found a small pink baby's bassinet with a torn-up Mickey Mouse blanket inside of it. It was upright, and it was at least a mile into the woods from any sort of road, so it didn't seem like it was garbage someone dumped. We would always make a point to find it when we went. There were also empty plastic liquor bottles on the ground around it, but nowhere else in the woods. I don't know if that's because it became some kind of effed up landmark for other kids or what. To this day, I have no effing idea why it would have been out there. Me and a few friends decided to go for a hike into the mountains. We live pretty rurally, so really almost any mountain is remote. We walked for about 2 hours through some poorly maintained walking trails and discovered a super out-of-place scene. There was a clearing in the brush not far from the trail with 4 blue tarps. On top of the tarps were blue and gray barrels. We decided to kick over one of them, and at first water came spilling out of it, followed by at least 100 cell phones, pagers, and Blackberries scattered along with some shoes. We opened up and knocked over the rest of them, and everyone was the same. Phones, shoes, and water, except one. One of the barrels was full of a chemical, almost rubbing alcohol-esque liquid, and at the bottom of it were a few more badly decayed phones. We had no idea what the hell it was. We thought it could have been an illegal dumping site, somewhere to hide evidence, or maybe just something weirder. We had a few theories, but none of them really seemed to stick or make sense. We tried to find it a second time a few days later, and we all swore up and down that we were in the same spot, but eerily enough, everything was gone. The only thing indicating it was the same spot were the strands of tarps left in the grass. This happened last weekend, Labor Day. My girlfriend and I were going hiking or camping near the Delaware Water Gap off the Appalachian Trail. We knew the risks of hiking later in the day, but since it was such a well-worn trail, and we got there relatively frequently, we ignored them. We arrived at the parking lot at 7 p.m. with about 30 to 45 minutes of daylight remaining. We set out, clanking pots to scare the bears away. Huge backpacking rigs to carry our gear made us slower and less mobile, but We didn't think much of it. An hour later, my girlfriend in front of us by a few paces slows to a stop and shines her flashlight ahead. It was dark enough to warrant the continued use of headlamps and my own flashlight, patrolling like a searchlight, mostly for peace of mind. XT421, what the hell is that? Convinced it was nothing, I shined my light in her gaze's direction to humor her. It was probably nothing. Oh shit, babe, I think it's a mountain lion. Mountain lions are reportedly extinct in New Jersey, but we're nerds and like researching dumb things, so we knew what bobcats look like. They are small, maybe a few feet long, not higher than your knees, with spots and stripes on their back, notably shorter tail. This was a beast, 6 feet long, long tail, sharp face, staring right at us. There are no markings on its back, and there were 3 sets of eyes on us, 30 feet ahead. We both stopped to assess how effed we were. My gut dropped. I couldn't panic because I knew running didn't solve anything. Fighting wouldn't either. The fiercest weapon we had were my hiking poles. No gun, no pepper spray. Just the pot clanking and the poles. What do? Well, I think we just walk away. I'll keep my eyes on them, I guess. Just don't trip. I didn't want to scare her, but she probably knew that if we tripped, and I am very trip-prone, they might see us as food and pounce. We made sure to talk to the lions loudly and directly, make sure they knew we were aware that they were in front of us, and at least project our lack of fear, as if. We walked away deliberately, passing them by. They watched us, I watched them. I kept my light trained on them, and looked back after our backs were turned. They were still watching. As we walked, I kept turning my gaze backward. They followed us for about a minute, then it stopped. We hiked in for another hour before we set up camp next to a bunch of other campers. We melted down a little in our tent, crying and reassessing how stupid and lucky we were. We speculated that this was a mother and 2 grown cubs. They must have been just woken up, because the likelihood of getting the jump on mountain lions is rare enough. Besides, if they wanted to be this close to us, they probably wouldn't have waited for us to get that close. They'd have done it themselves. So in short, it was an anomaly. We shouldn't have seen a mountain lion in New Jersey, but we saw 3, and they were exceptionally close up. We're lucky to escape without incident. Shortly after returning to civilization, we made reports with the ranger station and the New Jersey Department of Wildlife and Forestry to log what we saw. Crazy. It's always interesting and kind of cool when someone is telling a story, and I feel like I've been on the same path that they've been on. I have also hiked pretty regularly in the Appalachian Trail in the area of the Delaware River Gap on the Pennsylvania-Jersey border. It's like around Mount Tammany, Mount Mincy. So I feel like we've been on the same trails. That's all. No big thing there. I've never seen a mountain lion there, and only small black bears. So anyway, enjoy. Camping along, I was woken up in the middle of the night by a large dog barking at my tent. Spend the 2 first half hours terrified that the shepherd would come. Instead of the dog calling its mates, suddenly 2 dogs are barking, and I can hear a 3rd one responding from further away. Realizing that these are probably wild dogs. They've been here for over an hour now. I'm frantically Googling how to fight dogs, and it turns out it's not great to start on my knees. Now I'm wishing a shepherd or someone would come and find me. I have a whistle and a tactical lamp on me, so I set the lamp in SOS mode and start whistling like crazy, hoping to attract somebody. Dogs start barking and presumably leave after a while. I assume the whistling was really uncomfortable for them. Spend the rest of the night terrified they'll come back, but also too exhausted to pack up and leave. I grew up camping in the river bottoms of East Texas. There's nothing particularly pretty or pleasant about being out there. It's just away from everything, and fishing or hunting can be really, really good. It's also an effing creepy place if you're out there at the right time of year. The river bottoms flood in the spring, so in late summer or fall, everything is uniformly dried mud brown. Most of the trees are uniformly small, 4 to 10 inches, and you can walk for hours and it would still look exactly like the area outside of your campsite. It's very easy to get lost. When I was around 9 or 10 on a camping trip with my family, my uncle got turned around while out hunting. We had specific whistles that we would use to communicate our location with others and help locate ourselves when we were out in the woods. But he didn't realize he was turned around until he walked out of earshot. He was found 3 days later, almost 20 miles from where we were camping. He had crossed a river and 2 highways, but didn't remember any of them. Complete panic. I was in the truck with my dad when we went to pick him up on the side of the road, surrounded by state troopers. He just bawled and blubbered all the way back to his house. It made a huge impact on me, and I had a fear of getting lost in the woods ever since. Okay, fast forward 25 years. I'm camping with my wife, her parents, and my 3-year-old daughter in the middle of nowhere in the Smoky Mountains. My in-laws offered to watch the kid so that my wife and I could go on a hike. Not long into the hike, I went back for my camera and found my 3-year-old wandering through the woods by herself about 50 yards away from the camp. I wouldn't have heard her if she hadn't been singing to herself. Now, I'd previously expressed reservations about leaving her with my sometimes absent-minded in-laws after previous incidents, one of which led to a trip to the ER where I didn't feel like they kept a close enough eye on her. But it always turned into a huge fight with my wife, so I didn't press it. Because of this, I scooped up my kid and took her with me on the hike with my wife without making a big deal out of it or letting my in-laws know that I was taking her with me. We get back to camp about 4 hours later. I came up with an excuse to pause with my daughter before we're back in view of camp because I wanted to see how her parents would react to our return. They were both sitting next to the tent reading books, not a care in the world. They didn't realize that anything was wrong until I walked back carrying my kid. Huge fight. My wife, who wasn't previously aware of how I found our daughter, completely flipped out on them. We packed them up, hiked back to the road, and drove the 15 hours back home that day. It took my wife several weeks before she calmed down enough to explain to them without screaming why it was such a problem. It's been 5 years, and I still get angry when I think about it. TL, DR. I like camping, but I have a thing about getting lost in the woods. My in-laws let our 3-year-old wander out of our camp in the middle of the Smoky Mountains and didn't realize it for 4 hours.